Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. So today we're going to be unpacking The Courage to Grow. And this book really reframes how we think about fear. So instead of saying, conquer it or ignore it, this book kind of wants us to look at fear as like a tool for positive change, which I think is a really cool concept.
Yeah, it's really refreshing, isn't it? It's like, we're not supposed to be these fearless robots. Fear is a natural part of being human. It's wired into our brains. But it's what we do with that fear that really matters.
Okay, so how does this book approach fear differently? I mean, we've all heard, face your fears. But this seems to go a bit beyond that.
Absolutely. It starts by kind of acknowledging that, fear had a very important purpose for our ancestors. Like imagine you're back on the savannah and suddenly there's a lion. That jolt of fear, the fight or flight response, that's what helped our ancestors survive.
Okay, that makes sense in like a prehistoric context,
Yeah.
but I'm guessing the book is arguing that fear plays a different role in our modern lives.
Exactly. Our threats have changed, but our brains haven't quite caught up. So we still experience that same intense fear response, even when we're not in any real danger. Have you ever noticed how your heart starts pounding before a big presentation? Even though you know logically it's not a life or death situation, that's your amygdala taking charge.
Right, the amygdala, that's the part of our brain that processes fear, right? It's like our built-in alarm system.
Precisely. And while it served us well in the past, it can be a bit overzealous in our modern world. The book uses this example of a woman named Sarah who is terrified of social gatherings. It turned out that this fear stemmed from a childhood experience where she was publicly ridiculed at a party. So her amygdala essentially created a link between social situations and intense discomfort, even though the adult Sarah was a confident and capable person.
So it's like our past experiences can actually shape how our brains respond to fear in the present. It's not just about the situation itself, it's about the meaning we've attached to it based on our personal history.
Exactly. And that's why understanding the science of fear is so important. When we know what's happening in our brains and bodies, we can start to manage those fear responses more effectively. The book also highlights the fact that we often experience psychological fears, like the fear of failure or the fear of not being good enough. These fears might not have a specific triggering event like Sarah's, but they can be just as debilitating.
Okay, this is starting to make sense. But if fear is so deeply ingrained in our biology and influenced by our past, how do we even begin to change our relationship with it? It feels like we're at the mercy of our brains.
That's where the book's insights into the psychology of fear become really powerful. It emphasizes that our thoughts and beliefs play a huge role in how we experience fear. It's not just about the external situation, it's about how we interpret and respond to it internally.
So it's like our minds can amplify our fear, even when the situation itself isn't that scary.
Exactly. The book actually talks about the negativity bias, which is our brain's natural tendency to focus on negative information. So you know that feeling when you dwell on one critical comment, even after receiving tons of praise. That's your negativity bias at work. Our brains are wired to scan for potential threats, which means we're often more attuned to negative experiences than positive ones. It's a survival mechanism that helped our ancestors avoid danger. But it can make it harder to manage fear in our modern world.
That is mind-blowing. So it's not our fault that we sometimes gravitate towards the negative. It's actually how our brains are wired. I've always struggled with self-doubt, and this negativity bias thing actually makes me feel a bit better about it.
I'm glad to hear that. And this is a key point the book drives home. We have more control over our fear than we might realize.
Okay, but how do we actually start to shift our thinking? Does the book offer any practical guidance on how to challenge those negative thoughts and create a more positive or at least a more balanced perspective?
It absolutely does, and that's what we'll delve into next. But before we move on, there's one more crucial point the book makes about the nature of courage. It argues that courage isn't the absence of fear.
Interesting. Then what's courage, according to this book?
The book defines courage as acting despite your fear. It's acknowledging that fear is present, but choosing to move forward anyway.
So it's not about being some kind of fearless superhero,
No?
but about showing up and taking action even when we feel afraid. That makes courage seem a lot more accessible, like something we can all cultivate. I'm really intrigued to hear how the book suggests we actually build this courage muscle.
You're absolutely right. It's not about erasing fear, but transforming how we relate to it. The book actually gives us this roadmap for this transformation with a three-step process: acceptance, curiosity, and action.
Okay, a three-step process. I love a good framework. Let's break it down. What does the book mean by acceptance?
So acceptance is about acknowledging your fear
Mhm.
without judgment. Instead of trying to push it away or pretend it doesn't exist, you simply recognize that it's there. You say to yourself, okay, yes, I'm feeling afraid right now, and that's okay. This might seem simple, but it's a really powerful shift.
It's like when you have a messy room and you just keep shutting the door, hoping it'll magically clean itself.
Yep.
But then you finally decide, okay, it's messy, but I can deal with this.
Yeah.
And just that acknowledgement can sometimes make the task feel less daunting.
That's a great analogy. Acceptance takes away some of fear's power because you're not wasting energy resisting it. It creates space to examine the fear more objectively.
So we acknowledge the fear. What's next? We get curious.
Exactly. Curiosity is about asking questions instead of running away. The book suggests asking yourself things like, okay, what is this fear trying to tell me? Is there a message here I need to hear? What's the worst that could happen? And could I handle it?
So we're treating fear like a messenger instead of an enemy. We're trying to understand what it's trying to communicate instead of just trying to silence it.
Precisely. And that curiosity can help you kind of reframe your fear. For example, if you're afraid of starting your own business, that fear might be a sign that this is something deeply important to you. It means you care about the outcome.
That's such an interesting way to look at it. Instead of seeing fear as a sign that we're on the wrong path, we can see it as confirmation that we're moving towards something meaningful, something that challenges us to grow.
Exactly. But of course, understanding our fear is only part of the equation. The real magic happens when we move to the third step, action.
Okay, action. It all comes down to this, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But if we're still feeling afraid, how do we find the courage to actually take that first step?
Remember, the book defines courage as acting despite your fear. You don't have to wait for the fear to disappear before you take action. In fact, action is often the antidote to fear.
So we don't need to feel 100% confident
Mm-hmm.
or fearless to start moving forward.
Not at all. The book emphasizes that even small actions can be incredibly powerful. Each time you face your fear, no matter how small the step, you build confidence and prove to yourself that you are capable of more than you thought. Remember Sarah, the woman who was terrified of social gatherings. The book describes how she started by simply committing to attending one social event per month, and each time she went to an event, she focused on having one genuine conversation.
So she set realistic goals
Yeah.
and broke down the larger challenge into smaller, more manageable steps.
Yeah.
I love that approach. It makes facing fear seem a lot less daunting.
Exactly. And the book emphasizes that it's not about being perfect or never making mistakes. It's about learning from those experiences and using them to fuel our growth.
So we're not supposed to avoid failure, but rather embrace it as part of the process.
Precisely. The book also highlights the importance of having a support system. Surrounding yourself with people who believe in you and encourage you to be brave can make a huge difference when you're facing your fears.
It's like having your own personal cheering section to help you through those tough moments. Okay, I'm starting to see how these three steps, acceptance, curiosity, and action, work together to help us shift from fearing fear to using it as a catalyst for growth. But is there anything else in the book that can help us embrace fear in this way?
There is. The book also explores the idea that there are actually different types of courage. It's not just about facing physical danger or taking big, bold risks. Courage can be much quieter and more personal than that.
Okay, I'm really curious about this. What are these different types of courage the book talks about?
So the book breaks courage down into three main categories: physical courage, moral courage, and emotional courage. I'm sure you can guess what physical courage involves. It's about facing physical danger or pushing your physical limits.
Right, like firefighters or athletes, they embody that kind of courage.
Exactly. But the book argues that courage isn't just about physical acts. It also highlights the importance of moral courage.
Moral courage, what does that look like?
Moral courage is about standing up for what you believe in, even when it's difficult or unpopular. It's about speaking truth to power, defending someone who's being mistreated, or simply doing the right thing, even when it's hard.
So moral courage is about integrity and having the strength to live by your values, even when it's challenging.
Exactly. And then there's emotional courage, which the book describes as the courage to face our inner world, our vulnerabilities, insecurities, and difficult emotions.
Ah, emotional courage. That resonates with me. It takes courage to be honest with ourselves about our flaws and to work on those aspects of ourselves that we might want to hide. It also takes courage to be vulnerable with others, to let down our guard and show our true selves, even if it means risking rejection or judgment.
You've got it. And those acts of emotional courage can be just as challenging, if not more so,
Yeah.
than acts of physical or moral courage.
I can definitely see that. It takes a lot of courage to open ourselves up to the possibility of being hurt or rejected.
Yes, it does. And I think we'll need to dive into these different types of courage a bit more. They are a fascinating aspect of this book and offer a deeper understanding of how we can cultivate courage in all areas of our lives.
So we're back. And I am fascinated by this idea of different types of courage. It makes it seem so much more multifaceted than just the classic hero image we often see.
I agree. The book's breakdown of courage really expands our understanding of what it means to be brave. We left off talking about emotional courage, which can be one of the most challenging forms of courage to cultivate.
Yeah, you mentioned that it involves like facing our inner world, things like vulnerability, insecurity, and difficult emotions. Can you elaborate on what that looks like in practice?
So it's about being willing to acknowledge and experience our emotions fully without trying to suppress them or deny them. It's also about being honest with ourselves about our weaknesses and imperfections. And perhaps most importantly, it's about having the courage to be vulnerable with others.
Vulnerable, that sounds terrifying. Why is vulnerability so important for emotional courage?
Well, it allows us to connect with others on a deeper level when we're willing to let down our guard and show our true selves. We create space for authentic connection and intimacy.
I could see that. It's like we have to risk getting hurt in order to experience the fullness of human connection. But how do we actually develop this emotional courage? Does the book offer any specific strategies?
It does. The book emphasizes the importance of self-awareness and self-compassion. So start by noticing your emotional triggers, those situations or thoughts that tend to bring up feelings of fear, shame, or insecurity. Once you're aware of your triggers, you can start to practice self-compassion.
Self-compassion. So instead of beating ourselves up for feeling afraid or insecure, we treat ourselves with kindness and understanding.
Exactly. The book reminds us that everyone makes mistakes. Everyone has vulnerabilities, and it's okay to not be perfect. It also suggests engaging in practices like journaling, meditation, or therapy, which can help you process difficult emotions, challenge negative self-talk, and develop a stronger sense of self-acceptance.
So it's about building a supportive relationship with ourselves so that we can face our inner challenges with more courage and resilience.
Yes. And remember, the book's core message is that courage is a skill, not an innate trait. This applies to all three types of courage, physical, moral, and emotional. It's something we can develop and strengthen over time with practice.
So even if we don't see ourselves as like naturally brave people, we can still cultivate courage in our lives. That's so empowering.
Absolutely. And the book offers this beautiful perspective on how to approach this process. It suggests that instead of trying to eliminate fear, we can learn to dance with it.
Dance with fear. That's a beautiful image.
It is, isn't it? The book reminds us that fear is a natural part of life. It's what keeps us safe and alerts us to potential danger. But it's also what keeps us stuck in our comfort zones and prevents us from living fully.
So it's about finding that sweet spot between being reckless and being paralyzed by fear.
Exactly. It's about learning to listen to fear's whispers, to understand its messages, and then to choose how we respond. We can let fear dictate our actions, or we can acknowledge it, learn from it, and then move forward with courage.
I love that. It's like we have a choice in every moment. We can let fear be the driver, or we can choose to take the wheel ourselves.
Yes. And the more we practice choosing courage, the more natural and accessible it becomes. It's like building a muscle. The more we use it, the stronger it gets.
Okay, so we've talked about the different types of courage, the three-step process for embracing fear, and the idea of dancing with fear. Is there any final takeaway you want to leave our listeners with?
Just this. You are braver than you think. You have within you the capacity for incredible courage. And every time you choose to face your fears, to speak your truth, or to show up authentically in the world, you are tapping into that power. Don't underestimate the power of small acts of courage. They can ripple outward, creating positive change in your own life and in the lives of those around you.
Beautifully said. This has been such an enlightening deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your expertise with us. And to our listeners, we hope you feel inspired to explore your own relationship with fear and to embrace the transformative power of courage in your own lives. Until next time, keep diving deep.